Hello, and thank you for being here. Greetings from beautiful Traverse City, Michigan. I'm Amanda Rude, the Executive Director for the National Writers Series. And we are delighted to have you join us tonight for this very special evening with the one and only George Saunders, who will be joined in conversation with our guest host, Kevin Fitton. Kevin Fitton is a writer, musician, educator, and instructor for the National Writers Series Creative Writing Labs. He is the author of the story collection Auras, forthcoming from Formite Press. He published the children's book Higher Ground with Caldecott-winning artist Mary Azarian, along with over a dozen short stories in nationally recognized magazines like Jabberwock, Limestone, and the Saturday Evening Post. He holds an MFA from Bennington College and is the recipient of a doctoral scholar award at Western Michigan University, where he is pursuing his PhD in creative writing. George Saunders is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 10 books, including Lincoln in the Bardo, which won the Man Booker Prize, 10th of December, a finalist for the National Book Award. Congratulations, by the way, the Brain Dead Megaphone, and the critically acclaimed short story collections Civil War Land, In Bad Decline, Pastoralia, and In Persuasion Nation. He teaches in the creative writing program at Syracuse University, where for the last 20 years, he has taught a class on the Russian short story to his MFA students. In A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, he shares a version of that class with us. And it is, as expressed by Oprah Daily, a worship song to writers and readers. Praise be. Please welcome to our virtual main stage, Kevin Fitton and George Saunders.
Oh. Hi, Kevin.
Hello, George. It's good to be here.
Me too.
Here with you talking about your new book. And I'm going to offer my own very brief introduction, which is just going to be the way that I think of you, which is the author of a lot of great fiction, The 10th of December, which is one of my favorite books. And this new book, A Swim in the Pond in the Rain, which is a really wonderful book about writing. And as a friend of mine pointed out, it's a book about how to read stories, which I think is a really beautiful part of that experience of working through that book. And you're also, Amanda did not mention, the winner of the MacArthur Genius Grant.
I think it expired. That was a while ago.
Did it expire? You're no longer a genius. Well, I wanted to bring up the Genius Grant because I think it is the best named of all the fellowships. I like the idea that we give out an award. And maybe this is, you're too humble for it, but if I were to win it, I would definitely make my friends and family call me a genius, because then it would
it actually makes a lot of problems when you put your watch down the garbage disposal and someone can go, nice work, genius. So,
yeah,
it's worth it. It's okay.
I also think we'll get into the book, but I wish that there were more trophies for artists and writers. And I think that for the Genius Award, I don't know if you got this, but they should have a brain on top of, the stand instead of the soccer player or the basketball player. It's just a brain.
Yeah, that would probably end up in the garbage disposal. So.
Talk to the MacArthur people about it. We just, as artists, we don't get the trophies. So we need to get more trophies involved.
We moved past all that.
Anyways, so I think that MacArthur thing's pretty great. I do want to talk about your book though. And I think I just want to start out with the fact that one of the things I loved about your book, your new book, is that it just really lacks cynicism. It may be because I am deep in academia and have been for a while now, but I feel like it can be hard to really talk about stories and even story writing without a lot of cynicism kind of shining through. I think I feel like I encounter sometimes almost more desire to subvert the story than to really tell one. So I guess what I'm sort of wondering is for you, what is it that makes you want to write a book about the story that really, celebrates the story?
Yeah, well, I mean, really, it's just the story is something that I started working on really young, just because my heroes did, like Carver and Hemingway. And then, they're so hard and they're so all inclusive. There's nothing that you can feel in this life that can't be in a story. And conversely, there's no story that's any good that doesn't somehow tap into your experience. So I think it's just kind of a lifelong fascination with this form that when I was starting out, I thought, oh, it's just like an easier novel, it's less pages. And then as you understand what they actually are, and you try to execute one, you see that it's just a lifelong thing, and you'll never quite get it right. So that's, you kind of look up and you're like, well, I'm 60, whatever I am, I have definitely dedicated my life to this form. And I've taught. So at some point I was like, I'd like to kind of try to turn directly to this thing and write about it, write about the stuff I know about it, about the stuff I don't know about it. And really what you end up writing about is how do you know, what kind of relationship are you in with your reader and with the story itself as you go about. So it just keeps opening up, I guess, is the short answer,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it sounds like you just feel like it's not something that's diminished for you over time, but it's something that's like continued to be a challenge. I mean, you mentioned that it's at the very end of the book. I mean, I think, and you bring a lot of humility to the book. But this idea that you feel like you still feel like you've just fallen short of what you've wanted to create. And that's a part of the drive to keep doing it.
Yeah. And it can be such a rich feeling because I was, in retrospect, a really arrogant young person. And I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll just write the best story anyone's ever written. And actually, I'll write 10 of them, leave everybody behind in the dust, this. And then as you get to know the form, you see, like anything in life, it's not really about being superior. It's about living into who you actually are. So to write the story that is most organic to me, that would be a good goal, And then you see that even that's a stretch, and you see all these beautiful stories have been written over these many years, and you're sort of like, like Steve Martin in The Jerk. You just want to be in there somewhere, And that for me, it was a really nice journey to kind of go from, I want to reign supreme with no work to I was willing to work the rest of my life like a crazy person if I can just be in that number somewhere. That's a nice sane readjustment of your view, I guess.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think it's hard to think, I think also as an artist, like how do you determine what is success and what kind of achievement you want to have? I mean, like you said, I think there are times in which maybe we just have crazy expectations for ourselves. But I also think that for a lot of people, it's hard to imagine having any success at all,
Yeah. Well, for me, the biggest thing I've noticed was that there's been a very slow transition from, okay, I would say at any given time, I've got a couple things going on. One is I want to be good at this art form. The other one is, more venal. I want to get attention for it. I want to be known for being good at it. I want to have the, whatever material benefits are being a short story writer. I want that. A whole complex of things. Over the years of doing it, the first one has come to predominate. So I really just want to, I have aesthetic ambition right now that's quite strong because I realize how hard it is, how unlikely it is to write a good story, and how little time I have left. So that's pretty strong. And the other things, I mostly feel like, one, I've gotten more than I probably deserved. And two, you can't summon those things. The only thing you can really summon is the aesthetic part of it. So I think for me, that is what I would consider success, is that the shift changed. So instead of being wildly ambitious for, recognition, now I'm a little more wildly ambitious for actual accomplishment in the aesthetic realm, which is, and that you can manage. That is actually within your control. You can work as hard as you can work and then be happy to get any result whatsoever. And that doesn't drive you crazy the way that the other stuff I think can,
Mm-hmm. Well, that other stuff is like, it is so out of control in a lot of ways. I mean, that's other people's response, right? As opposed to the part that you're doing, which is trying to write something that's as good as you can create, that uses your, I mean, it's another thing that I really thought was interesting in your book, and I appreciated, was this idea of, you just have to also cultivate a sense of what you think is good as a writer, That idea that you're just constantly going back to these words and these sentences and paragraphs and the relationship between each paragraph and scene and trying to get it to sound right to you.
Yeah, and I think that's actually what people like. If you ever see a musician who's really believing in what she's doing, they're lost in it, enthusiastic, somehow that's a lot. Like I think of the early Neil Young records, where he was just doing something kind of weird, but you could see he was 100% okay with it. And I remember as a young kid thinking, oh, his voice sounds strange. It doesn't sound like other people's voices, and those guitars are a little out of tune or a little raw. But the confidence, and the positive self-absorption that was going on was kind of what drew me in. So I think I tell my students that, the only thing you really have to offer is you amplified, your choices, your quirky, relation to language, and your interest, the things that are deep with you. And I think that there's sort of a leap of faith to say, if I can really concentrate on those choices, the result will somehow be interesting to another person. Now, that's not always true. That's the tricky thing, is sometimes you can do all that and still write something that's not interesting. But I think somehow in art, it's weird, but if you go deeply into your own preferences, it ends up being more universal than less.
Yeah. I mean, and you have to do that work over time of cultivating that sensibility. And I think that's something too that, I think I'm still, maybe we're always still working on that. Even like this question of what do you love and what really resonates for you. Like, I feel like for a long time, that was a question that I didn't know how to answer. When I couldn't make connections very well between the writers that I loved. Like they just seemed to stand on their own island. And I think that's a part of what I've been working on is developing like that aesthetic.
Yeah.
Things relate to one another.
The magical thing for me was the moment that I realized that there's two things. There's having a stance on what you love, articulating it, making a list, that's actually not that useful to what we do. That's okay. I mean, and for teaching, it's really useful. But when you're actually in the thing itself, it's not, it really kind of doesn't matter what you think. It matters what you do. And my kind of, my thing is it matters what you do, even on the smallest level. So if your work for the day is to cross a line out, that's okay. That's pretty good. If it made the story better, that's good. So for me, the whole thing was a kind of, I came from a working class background, and I had a tendency to really glorify art, the idea of the muse, and you had to be in a certain state of mind and you had to be inspired. And it's been a long process of saying, the muse comes to you through your red pen. I mean, the muse really likes you to be paying attention and making small decisions. And that's been a comfort just in terms of, writer's block and not getting in your own way, just to say, maybe this thing we call art is a matter of just thousands of micro decisions that you make over a long period of time. The thing that accumulates is actually what you believe, and it's going to be more complex than the thing you could have pre-imagined, by many, many, miles.
Yeah, I mean, and that's another standard that I think we can turn to for success, is this ability to create something that's smarter than you are. I mean, I feel like that's always such a great gauge. If you look back on a story that you've written, you say, I don't know how I got there, because I didn't have that in me. When I started, it was sort of the process that got you to that place.
Yeah. One of the things that when I was writing the book, what I realized was that I always loved fiction. And I think I'd kind of internalized this cultural idea that the short story and maybe fiction itself, it's a bit of a niche thing. Like it's quaint. It's kind of something they used to do and we're not as good at it. But in writing the book, I realized that actually storytelling is, first of all, it's exactly what the brain does. I mean, it's literally the fundamental neurological process is making a rough draft of a situation and then amending it, editing it via sensory input. And, so that's what we do in writing stories, is exactly what we do as human beings in every instant. And then this idea you just mentioned of kind of making something smarter than ourselves. I think many of us, hopefully we had an experience of that in our own lives, that you make these thousands of decisions as you grow up and you have a family and all that, and you look up and your life has a wisdom to it that you didn't put there. It has a kind of a cumulative motion towards some kind of wisdom or some kind of coherence. So that to me is really good news, because it means that we don't have to be entirely reliant only on the kind of conceptual thinking or the kind of ruminative thinking that we do normally. There actually is a vast treasury of method, a way of approaching the world that's intuitive and subconscious. That's actually quite wise. So we're not, especially these days where we get so much stimulation and so many concepts thrown at us, and many of those concepts are so anxiety provoking. I find it a real comfort to know that I've got another part of my mind to work with that isn't really dependent on, judgment, deciding, being right or wrong, making a hot take, having a stance. There's something that we have access to that's bigger than all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like, I appreciate the way you talk about it as work and as like the result of intuition and the result of like labor. I joked about the genius thing, but partly because it is funny, because it is like, it's our cultural idea that these things sort of pop into people's minds and that the creation is the result of some special gift that a person has. And
Right.
Certainly, it's helpful to have talent or to have like an ear or to be maybe a certain type of person, but that also in some ways kind of diminishes the work. It's work, labor.
No, exactly. And then what I tell my students is, and my students are so talented, we get about 700 applications a year, and 6 of them get to come and study for free for 3 years. And I just tell them, you do the work to find out if you quote unquote have it, whatever that is. That's a nebulous idea anyway, but you do the work to find out what you've got. It's not the other way around. It's not like you decide what you've got and then you do the work. You go through all this rigor and this so-called craft just to see, if your particular neurology has whatever it takes to make stories that are compelling to other people. But I think a lot of that journey is to really be, hungry, but also unsure, to really not know if you have anything to offer, to work really hard to see if you do, and then be grateful if it turns out you do, as opposed to, the genius model, which is I know something. I can't tell you what it is. You'll have to read my book. I put it in there. That whole idea I think is it's very romantic, but it sure didn't work for me, because everything that I knew, everybody else knew, and it wasn't that interesting. And when I tried to do that in a book, it felt, of course, kind of condescending, like, let me dump the garbage truck of my ideas on you. Nobody really wants that,
Yeah, it just maybe it works for some people. My suspicion.
That's the other thing, right? Yeah.
If anyone, yeah, we have a funny idea about art and artists. Even the idea of whether it's teachable. Like when I was looking at master's programs, I went to visit a school, and there was someone who was on the visit who kept saying, like, you can't teach people how to write. And I just thought, well, then why are you here? Like, what are you? Why? And also, why wouldn't you? Like, why wouldn't you be able to teach somebody how to do another thing? Like yes, there's some mystery to it, but I don't understand exactly where that comes from, but I've heard that a lot of times.
I think it's a very, very rarefied kind of teaching. At least if you're like at Syracuse, if you're picking 6 out of 700, they don't need much from you. They're already writing better than anyone in their world, But I think there's a kind of it's mentoring, it's coaching actually, to say, and that for me, it's a lot of listening to what they say, but also listening in terms of reading what they write, and then being a little bit more like a doctor, like, well, what do you need? What are your instructions? What are your anxieties? Here's what I'm noticing you do this. Is this what you mean? So it's much more about, I think, kind of a mentorly judo kind of, and these students are very receptive to that, because they know, like, for example, one thing that happens a lot is a student will come in and you mentioned cynicism at the beginning. A young writer will come in with a real kind of, edgy, negative, I don't like anything kind of piece, but that seems to be erring on the side of saying that life is crap, then my job is to go, okay, I can see this person. I can see that he doesn't actually feel that way. He's a good friend. He seems to like his mom and dad, So then the teaching is just sort of gently coaxing that person off that ledge a little bit. And the best way to do that is through technical critique, not to say, hey, cheer up, but to show where, this sentence here that's got a very negative sense to it, it's a little bit false. You underline that or you change the wording. And then at some point, there's usually a chance where you can have a little office talk and say, I think you're a more optimistic person, or I bet you've had more positive experiences and being reflected in your story. That's the hardest thing to represent in fiction, positive experience. And then you see them kind of light up like, oh, thank God. I don't really believe what I see in my story, but I don't know how to, I'm afraid of being sentimental, So in a way, I think it's kind of like permission giving based on the places I've been in my work, because I was that kid for sure, So in a way, it's just like sort of almost, I think that sometimes it's just, spreading out a little beautiful carpet for them to step onto, going in the same direction they meant to go and with the same energy, but you just as an older person are saying, oh yeah, of course you can praise love, of course you can have a positive older figure who's not a molester, like that kind of stuff. And you're teaching well because you can see the relief in their faces, and then this is true in all kinds of different.
Yeah, the accusation of being overly sentimental is one that I've I've received that critique a number of times, and I actually on a recent story I submitted to workshop, I just as a trigger warning, I said this might be overly sentimental.
Yeah. Well, it's a hard thing to do, because over sentimental is just as bad as overly cynical. They're both kind of like refusals to engage with the actual, which is usually somewhere between the two. So, but the main thing I try to do is remember that all these things are technical. If you say a story is misogynistic, I will say where. And you will show me, and then we can fix it. So it's all about the lines, and that.
Well, and that's what I think you do a great job in this book, showing how that happens at a line level. I mean, the two of the discussions that I really loved were the Tolstoy stories, where you really dug into, like in Master and Man, how does that ending work? Because it does reflect, I mean, something that I love about Tolstoy, which is that he wants to do something meaningful with his work. And it is sort of a treacherous cliff that he's walking along where, you have to believe it. Like you have to believe on the line level that this person was transformed. The person who at the beginning of the story is so selfish makes this incredibly selfless choice at the end of his life.
Yeah, but I just love the idea that you just said, which is that it all, at a certain point in the story, you're still in it. You're in it, but you've got some worries, Well, then the writer has the next line to either convince you or screw everything up. That's really how it works. It's a linear temporal phenomenon. Line at a time, you believe or you don't. That was really big for me when I realized that. It's literally like doing stand-up. You have the audience, you say something stupid or thoughtless, and you don't have them anymore. Can you get them back? You can if you admit that you just said a stupid thing. So that whole idea that it's a communication between you and the reader really helped me understand it. Before that, as a working class kid, I thought it was about being super smart and kind of showing off for 20 pages and going, thank you very much, I'm smarter than you. And then to say, no, of course it isn't that. It's about talking directly to somebody that you respect and leaning in and interesting them. That's something that has a direct relation to revision then, when you find yourself being condescending or when you find your narrative voice is suddenly absent or something, that's when you have to revise. So I like this idea that, Tolstoy he was walking a cliff. that's a real accomplishment to have somebody reading your story think, please don't screw it up. I care about this story so much. And then my theory is he knew that. He knew exactly what was at stake. He knew what the sophisticated reader was leery of. And then somehow he pulled one more rabbit out of his hat and made even the sophisticated reader, burst into tears or feel convinced. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, I think the other Tolstoy book, I mean, you get into, or the story, this idea of like he wasn't satisfied, or like such an interesting discussion of how he came to that ending and how it works on us as a reader. I mean, it maybe goes back to the idea of, like there is sometimes like a trust and intuition, or even like falling into it.
Right. And I also like the idea that, as we know, a story is a made thing. I mean, it's not what happened to you ever, almost never, it might start there, but it doesn't. So a story is a made thing. The writer gets into it and gets stymied and confused and messes it up. And that's all part of it. I think that's why it's such an essential mode of communication, is that we feel both the truth and the falseness in it. When in Chekhov's The Story of the Darling, that's a beautiful portrait of a woman, but it's a woman who never existed. She's a cartoon. We kind of know that. So the fact that a story is really, when your parent says once upon a time, part of you goes, no, it didn't.
Right.
Making this up. And then another part says, but please go ahead, well, please continue. We'll see what you do with it. So it's a made artifact that has something to do with the writer's mind. It's kind of like a scale model for the universe, but it's not the universe, So that book was fun in that sense, to say, well, here's what I think Chekhov was doing. I don't know for sure, here's how I think Tolstoy approached that ending. And I'm not really sure that I'm right, but I think it's viable. When I say those things, I think I'm not completely wrong about the process that they went through in trying to come up with those little artifacts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it also seems like there's something about the shorter the piece is, the more the reader is sort of willing to play along with the game that the writer has set out to play. And I think you see that, like, a lot of these are very short stories, and if they were expanded into novels, like, I don't know how the nose, would go for 300.
Right. No, that's true. I had that feeling. I wrote a book that had Lincoln in it, and I became really aware that you wanted to get that guy on the stage and off pretty quickly. You didn't want 80 pages of Lincoln, because the cracks would start to show. You start to see that I don't really know who Lincoln was, or so I think that's true. But also the short stories, the really short ones are tough. They're like a joke. You get to the end of a 3-page story and the magic either happened or it didn't. And so it's a fascinating form. It never. And I think it also is kind of wonderful because it allows, or I think it thrives on its own problems. Like if you're writing a story and you get to an obstruction, you get to a wall, you can rest assured that the solution of the problem is going to include that obstruction. You're not just going to fix it. You're going to somehow, it's like if you go to lunch with somebody and it's an awkward conversation because of something that you don't want to talk about. Well, it's going to keep being awkward until somebody says it. I'm angry at you for stealing my car. Well, once the person says that, the conversation has come up to a new level of honesty, and it can go in a lot of directions. And I find stories are often like that when I'm working on them. There'll be a period where I'm like, God, you're supposed to be a professional. Why are you on page 4 for 6 months? And then at one point I go, well, I am stuck, and I have to turn to that to finish the story. And that usually allows some little honesty where you go, oh yeah, well, you've always hated this description on page 2 of this character, but you won't cut it because you're proud of it. You like it and you hate it, but why don't you try changing it? And then sometimes that one bit of honesty, you change that description, that changes conditions later, and the story can be finished. So it's.
Do you? Do you work on one piece at a time typically, Or do you use that space when you feel stuck on something to kind of let it sit and maybe detach a little bit from your, I mean, it's funny how
Yeah.
hard it can be to cut what you view as being a great line. And then 6 months later, when you come back to it, may not be quite as lovely as you thought it was.
100%. Yeah, I mean, in the perfect world, I've got, 2 or 3 stories going on at once. And that way I can just work on the one that I feel happiest about, or feel not happy, but kind of energized about, and I can avoid working on the one that I just feel, oh God, I hate this story. So if I have some choices, it means I can kind of go where the energy is. And then also, as you suggest, sometimes you solve a problem in one story, but your subconscious doesn't know you're on a different story. So it's solving a lot of problems at once. So I think for me, it's healthy to have some choices, because I've also been in the thing where you say, okay, yeah, I just have to finish this one before I can move on with my life. And then 2 years passes and you see that you've been knocking at the same door over and over again. So I think to try to treat your talent as kind of like a really beautiful tiger that's in your garage. You don't really know, you want to be careful with it. You want to challenge it. You want to kind of think of it as something separate from yourself. It's not, you're not your talent. You're the holder of it for this lifetime, but you have to kind of learn to work with it and trick it and assuage it and outsmart it sometimes, So having a few choices of stories to work on really is helpful, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I think sometimes it's great to have those multiple projects, and then, there is a tension there. Sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of where I want to go next. I mean, I guess another thing I'm really wondering, the end of the book really struck me, kind of where you came down. And I already brought up the idea that you sort of settled on this idea that you're like, I want to write stories, and that's what I've done, and I'm happy about that. I guess I'm wondering what that means for you going forward. I mean, does that mean I want to sit down and craft short stories in particular, or is it more expansive and open than that?
At that time it was short stories, because that, really that's all I've ever done. I took one break to write that Lincoln and the Bardo, which is a novel, but kind of, I don't know, there's a lot of white space, I don't know if it's a novel, but that was a kind of a one-off, and it came out of 20 years of having that thing in my mind. And honestly, right now, I don't have anything like that, tucked away. So my default has always been just write stories. And if one of them ever cries out for more pages, they can have it, but basically it's been a good life, just, trying to have two or three things lined up and just work through them. So that, and then also after that book, I was not kidding around. I was really kind of, I don't know, both appalled and thrilled by how good those Russian stories were, and how I haven't done enough. And so that's a nice feeling. It's 63 years old to say, I found my form. It's the most beautiful one to me in the world, and I still have a long way to go. That's kind of nice. It gives you something to do with the next, 70 years of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you've got, what you said, a couple hundred left.
Yes. Yeah. I did that.
As long as you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am also curious. We're going to start soon, I think, having some questions coming through from everyone who's on the call. But we were talking beforehand a little bit about music and how fun it was for you to have the opportunity to be in a studio. And, another thing that I noticed when I was looking into what you've been up to is you've got a film coming out this summer, which it seems like that you didn't do the screenplay. That was based on a short story. But I guess
I didn't have much with that one, except they had the rights. So
you let it go. But I wonder, have you seen any of that? Like, were you able to be on set or see any of the work that they've done?
I wasn't on set. I got to see some things just very late in the game, and the director did a really nice job. And it's strange to not have written it. And I'm working on something now that I'm writing a pilot, and so I like it. We did a pilot of my story Sea Oak a few years ago, and it was so much fun. We were talking before. It was just communal, and to actually sit down with a bunch of actors and write a scene on the set with an hour to go is really so different from fiction that I got the bug a little bit. It's really fun. But it's, but then again, you think I'm very aware of time and, how long it takes to write a good short story and how precious it is. So I'm kind of, a little torn, but so far it's a lot of fun. And it sure is a form that's very lively and full of talent right now. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would think the beauty of being able to collaborate. I guess it's you're saying about having all these talented people around. We do get that, I think, more than people realize as writers.
Yeah. Well, the fun thing was to have these actors do some of your lines, and then you kind of get their voice in your head and you go, oh, I could do something for her. It's kind of like, I suppose it must have been what it was like in Shakespeare's time, where you were actually collaborating with people who had certain really amazing talents. So, we had Glenn Close was in that pilot, and she was playing this very cautious, careful working class woman who died and came back like a really angry sort of socialist zombie, and so to say, what would I like to have Glenn Close say today in that character, which is so, that's sort of, and it's what we do anyway, but with the added sort of spice or yeast of having her voice in my head already, so that was really a lot of fun.
Yeah, that sounds great. It'd be fun to work with somebody like that.
It made it hard to come home to the little blank page for sure,
Yeah. Well, I'm looking through questions that are coming in, and a number of them are about the fact that you chose to write specifically in this book about the Russian short stories. And you do address that a little bit in the book. But, some of the people were asking if you saw like just a clear commonality with the Russian writers, or if there was something about that really made you want to focus on that set of writers.
Sure. Well, I'll give you the very honest answer, which is I was working as an engineer when my first book came out, and I got an offer of a 1-year job at Syracuse to teach. And one of the things they require that we teach a class called a forms class, which is basically literature for writers. So it's kind of like craft based and kind of learning tricks and that kind of thing. And I really, I'm not the most widely read person because my background was not in English lit, So, but I've been reading some Russian short stories, really liking them. And I'd studied them at Syracuse when I was there a few years prior. So I thought, okay, I'll say I'm going to do a class in the Russian short story, and I'll figure out what's going in it. And I'll read those for the first time, and that'll be a nice chance. So I did that, and it was a real successful class, really fun. And I just kept teaching it in a certain way. I wouldn't say sloth, but let's say momentum. I had the syllabus. It had gone well the year before. So I kept doing that, kind of refining the syllabus, and taught it probably over 20 years, probably 7 or 8 times, So, and it was just part of my life that was really special. It was something kind of almost like a secret thing. Like I say, I'm teaching the Russians next semester. They're going to love this, and then you go in, and sometimes there's some early resistance, and you're like, yeah, wait till you get to Master and Man, and that would happen. So it was really just a kind of a beloved hobby to teach that class. And then a few years ago, I thought, that's weird. If I kick off, which supposedly is going to happen someday, all that wisdom that was basically cumulative between me and my students over those 20 years, it just goes away, So I thought, that'd be fun. I'll write that book. And since I have the notes, it'll just be, I'll just type them up. And and that didn't happen. It was, but it was kind of a labor of love in service of this thing that sort of accidentally became central to my life over those years.
Yeah, that's so interesting that it went that way. And that you kind of like dipped. I think we've all been there when they're like, here's what I'll do. And then we'll just,
right.
But that it becomes so rich. The way that your love for the stories shines through in the book, and they become so much deeper when you read, your reflections on the stories.
Thanks. Well, one of the things that was, I mean, as far as coherence, the one thing is I winnowed down, we would normally cover 30 or 40 stories in a semester. So over those many years, I came to see which ones taught the best, the ones that were always, how when you're teaching, sometimes the energy just comes up in the class and you don't know why. And it's just, wow, these students are suddenly here. So the 7 stories always did that in over those years. So they're kind of the stories that teach the best. And I would say they're not even the best. I mean, Chekhov has a couple of stories that are better. I would say better than the ones in here. Gogol has one that's better than the Nose. But these are the ones that really, they seem written to be discussed, and you can get to a lot of sort of baseline fictional issues just by talking about these stories.
So the ones that you then picked out of the whole group were because of the kind of the pieces that in craft that you really wanted to focus on.
Yeah. And also there was a kind of the goal was to have the book not repeat itself too much. So to find the right stories and put them in the right order so that there was kind of a meta narrative that didn't double back on itself. And so that was a lot of kind of Rubik's Cube, changing the orders and then swapping in this story for that story and so on. Then changing essays and all that.
Yeah, like that principle of expansion, that you talk about, like how do you have a nonfiction book that has that same flavor, where it's expanding.
Right. And it's the same answer, which is just don't be too sure of what you're doing, and let the text tell you what it wants, and then it'll surprise you to the end.
Mm-hmm. There's so many good questions coming in, so it's making it really hard to filter through these. But there were several too about craft, and we talked about about draft, and we talked about this a little bit. But can you talk a little bit more about what your process looks like? Like, do you tend to get all the way through a first draft before you start fiddling with something?
Right. And let me first say, I whenever you talk about craft, I think you always want to put a parentheses like for me, this, because there's so many ways, there's a million ways it can be done. But for me, mostly, I think I've only maybe twice in my life, 3 times gotten through a whole draft first. Usually it's just a section, and then I go back the next day and it's not quite good enough, and I mess with it and polish it. Then it spits out the next bit. Then now it's a little bit longer and I polish. So it's kind of more like, if you could see it in fast motion, it would be kind of just like a seed crystal in biology. It grows out a little bit, it retracts, it grows out, it retracts. And then at some point I might take a run at the ending. But the stories of mine that I like the best were like that, the section at a time. And almost like I can't go on to section 2 until I feel like section 1 has been revised so thoroughly that it's not words anymore. It's like fact. It's like I feel like the person reading it would feel convinced that it had happened. And that's hard to get it to that point. Then when that happens, I feel like, okay, shoot, now I know where I am on page 3 and we can go ahead. That's fun. But I know people who swear by you write through the whole thing and you come back and fix it. So, in any path to the mansion.
Yeah, I've heard all versions of the way to approach it. It just like it has a lot to do. I mean, I know a lot of writers who just get the first draft out and then go back and work it. I know writers who write. I mean, Joanne Beard visited my grad school program, and she's, incapable of writing any other way than one sentence at a time, and then never goes back.
Right. I think a helpful way to look at it is to say, okay, basically, what are you trying to do? You're trying to find your way for paying extreme attention, So I think probably every writer would say, by the end of the story, you want to feel like you've taken responsibility for every phrase in there. You would not like there to be a phrase that's just there because it fell into the story, so whatever it takes for you personally to be able to pay attention at that level for 15 pages is one key. And then the other part of it, I think, is, I'm always wary of the tyranny of detritus. Like if it's a piece stays in there because it's been there for a month, it's not a good reason, And so, and as you're revising, your ability to see it fresh fades. So whatever method of revision you choose should somehow help you see your piece fresh every time. so this, so that a big chunk of garbage doesn't just stay in there because it's already there. That's a real challenge because, as you know, your eye kind of forgets it. It just, I'm doing edits on my new book now, like very last minute edits. And in two cases, I found I had done double verbs, like she reached out to out. And I've read that thing a million times, but my eye just didn't see it, So all these things I think are kind of like self-gaming. You're trying to find an editing method that will allow you to outsmart yourself, and anything goes, whatever works. And also it doesn't have to be consistent. You could swear by this method and next week go, that's not working anymore. So.
Yeah. So, do you have any way of articulating what you view as like your cultivated sense of taste and what you like, or does it just completely by feel?
It goes pretty, I can try, I know I have efficiency, but no, it's by feel. Maybe one level below that. I'm really always thinking, would Kevin keep reading at this point? Here's paragraph 1. And of course, it's an idealized reader who's much like me if I hadn't read it before. Would you keep going? So, and so there, what I'm really doing is I'm invoking a certain people-pleasing part of my personality that I'm not all that crazy about. But in this case, I'm using it for virtuous ends to say, dear reader, please keep going. I'll do anything I can to keep you on the hook, including cutting this paragraph if it's slowing you down unnecessarily, So for me, it's become more or less just compelling the reader to keep going and then imagining that reader generously. I don't want to imagine somebody who doesn't want to read. That's that person you can't keep going. But imagine somebody who's smart and worldly and curious and is in there in the right spirit, is as smart as me or a little smarter. Then if you can keep that person on the line, then that actually is a pretty good recipe for good prose. I would say that's my kind of current aesthetic thing, but really, truly it's by feel, Feel.
Yeah. How it is like, there's only so many words for that, for what you like about a sentence. We sort of ascribe like, Hemingway or certain sorts of styles to people, but that's always overly simplistic.
Yeah, and also I don't think for me, it doesn't do me much good at the moment of truth. If you're typing along and you can say show, don't tell, that doesn't help. It's like if you're playing tennis and you thought, you're trying to think about mathematical angles or something. It really is just, this is a kind of crazy, almost scary revelation I had was it really is all about feel in the moment. You don't really have to articulate it. You just have to be able to do it better and better by your own mind. So that's a very narrow ledge to walk along. But I think that's really the truth. And if you compare it a writer, you could have 10 writers in a room and ask them to stand up and talk about aesthetics. And mostly they'd say the same stuff. They'd say show, don't tell. They'd say specificity, efficiency, blah, blah, blah. Then you read their work and it's all over the place. So
right.
We don't really, most of us don't sign up to be talkers about writers, although obviously we do it sometimes for a hobby. But really, we sign up to write a story that would change somebody's life. That's different. Writing and talking about writing are two separate, enterprises.
Yeah. Well, writers, I think it was like a book by Joyce Carol Oates where she gives these examples of how poorly a lot of well-known writers are able to, or like analyze their own work or appreciate their own work. And I think one of the examples was Joyce. Joyce's favorite book was, a book that almost everyone sort of universally views as his worst.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like it's so hard to be self-evaluative. It's hard to be your own reader.
Yeah, it is.
Because a lot of what you're saying about the editing process is you have to somehow be your own reader, which means, stepping outside of yourself to some degree.
Yeah, I think too, I tell my students that one of the best kind of mirrors of that editing mind is to go into a bookstore and just pick up any book, or especially pick up a book by the hot new writer who happens to be the same age as you. Pick it up, read a paragraph, and just see what you think. I always talk about that meter in the head, positive, negative. Where's your what is your authentic response to that prose? That's exactly the part of your mind you should be using when you're editing. You don't have to defend it, you don't have to rationalize it, you just have to feel it. then the other thing that really helps me is to think about these amazing athletes. You're watching the Super Bowl or something, or a baseball game, and somebody does some insane thing with their body. It's poetic. It's incredible. Then they say, "How did you feel?" First of all, who cares? But second of all, that's not their thing. They just say, "Oh, I gave 110%. We had to get more points to win, so we tried to get more." We know that that's not what they're doing. So I think that the kind of shocking thing is in writing, which seems to be about expression. It's not about it. To be able to articulate what you did is not the point, really. Now, again, it's a related activity, but just as it's nice if a football player can give you a great explanation of how he did it, that's nice, but that's not why he's, getting the big bucks. So for me, it's liberating to say, especially after a long semester, okay, now you can stop articulating or trying to, and you can just do. And there's always a little surge because I don't have to know why, I just.
Yeah. Yeah, those are great. I mean, it's such a strange combination of using your intellect and letting go, which actually one of my former teachers, Alice Madison, has a great book about writing too called A Kite on a String. And the whole idea is, sometimes you have to let it go. You have to let the wind take the kite. But then there's also a part in the process where you have to take hold of the string and pull on it and guide it. And I find that to be a really useful metaphor.
Yeah, that's beautiful because, one of the things anybody who wants to be a writer, one, they really want to do it. They're really scared they won't be able to. They're aware of how subjective it is. And so in that mindset, you always seek a method, don't you? I mean, that's what we want. We want to be able to write out the 3 holy items and live by them. But the one holy item is just the kite on a string, which is you do it how you have to do it at that moment. And unfortunately, you can't phone it in. There's no autopilot. And that's exasperating. But as I'm getting older, it's also kind of lovely to know that, as you get older, your desire to have certainty, especially in these times, is so overwhelming. You just want something that makes sense, and it's kind of refreshing to go up to the writing room and go, well, in here, adherence to a method is going to mess you up. So you have to get comfortable with being unmoored, and having second by second judgments and not overarching ones. And then, to be up there writing, go, oh yeah, actually I can do that. I can actually be uncertain for 3 hours. I can be in an exploratory mindset instead of a lecturing, certain mindset. And then you go out in the world and you go back to your, your usual way of thinking. But
Yeah, somebody asks here, and I remember thinking about this a little bit too, and maybe you actually say it in the book, but about the title of the book, A Swim in the Pond in the Rain. Why did you choose that? I mean, it's such a great moment in that story.
Yeah.
But why did you?
It's just really, really hard to say, which is nice. No, it's from the Chekhov story Gooseberries, and the scene is where these 3 men they bathe together in this sort of outdoor swimming, bathing area pond. And one of them gets carried away with how enjoyable it is. And he's out in the middle going, oh my God. And turns out he's a person who later in the story delivers this withering critique of how decadent happiness is. So it's just that idea. Yeah, he was very sincere in the pond when he was happy, and he was very sincere when he was against it. Isn't that just human nature? So I thought that was a great title just because I wanted the book to be like that, to be a serious, intellectual, fun venture. And when we come out, we're not sure what we think, that kind of idea. But also, when I was in grad school, our teacher was Tobias Wolff, one of our teachers, and he gave a reading of that Chekhov trilogy, which has Gooseberries in the middle. And he's such a great reader. And he read that scene where the guy is in the pond full of delight so beautifully. And it was everybody was laughing in the room, but it was that special kind of laughter that was just full of everything, just an appreciative, life-loving, feel of laughter. And that was kind of the moment when I went, yeah, this is what I want to do. This, if I could, get a laugh like that would be worth it, so.
Yeah, I think that's one thing we really miss. I mean, that's part of what's beautiful about something like National Writers Series is the opportunity to hear writers talk about their work, but also read. I mean, it's such a joy to hear, a really wonderful writer, especially, writers who do so much with voice, to read their work out loud and with a group
Yeah.
of people. I mean, back when we used to sit in theaters together or spaces like that.
We do, and at Syracuse, we have just started doing again a third year reading where the graduating students give a reading from their work, and it's a great celebration, and their families come. But the other really, I sometimes wish we could begin with it, because one of the great lessons is you actually are there to engage your audience, whether you like it or not, and you can see some students really benefiting from that, and other people whose work is not doing that, a little bit of flop sweat. And it's a really incredible real-time education in this idea of being in communication with your audience, and I think people come away from that in itself, which is ostensibly a celebration. It's also part of it, maybe the last teaching, which is, well, here's 80 people listening to you. What are you going to do with that responsibility and that privilege?
Yeah. Is there a point at which you bring another reader or set of readers into your work? That's another question that people are asking, where you kind of to use that to get out of your own head a little bit.
I really don't. I mean, I wait until usually it's like there's 2 or 3 times when I felt like showing it to Paula, my wife, who's a wonderful writer and a good, really good reader of my work. I wait, not the first time, not the second, not the third, but not the fourth, like that. And then I'll show it to her, and then I'm really, she's a great reader. She knows me very well. She knows my different tricks. So if she's emotionally budged by it, then I know it's ready to send to the New Yorker. If she's not, then she didn't have to say why. I just go back to the drawing board. So I tend to wait really late in that process, because I kind of, by this point, I kind of know sort of theoretically the stages of my own revision process. So if I freshen my mind and go back to something, I can go, yeah, no, that's about 60% done, approximately. And then when I get to there, I give it to her and she'll tell me it's not. And so I tend to be I err on the side of not having other people read it, partly because I'm neurotic. And if somebody reads it and goes, hey, that's really good, I'm like, what? It's just really good. Oh, forget it. I'll throw it away. So and likewise, if someone says, oh God, it's really bad, I don't have a whole lot of confidence, I guess. So I tend to wait pretty long in the process. There's our cat.
The cat is in the conversation.
Yeah.
I'm also wondering, there were a couple questions in here as well. I know we're getting towards the end of our time, but you do play around with point of view a lot and use multiple point of view in the novel, but in short fiction as well. And how do you think about point of view? Is that something that you start with a clear idea in mind, or is that just a matter of feeling like, no, this other character has got to come in now and I need to shift?
It's more the second thing. My thought is I have an idea okay, a story has a certain economy, so it should be in one point of view. It should be in one time frame, continuous time frame. That's the baseline. Then the story will sometimes say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I need a flashback," and you kind of go, "Well, we're not really doing that." And it goes, "No, trust me. Then you go, okay, I'll try it." Likewise, with point of view, you start with one person, and then at some point there will be a pressing need for the other point of view. Then you begrudgingly let it in. And then the trick is, of course, to try to distinguish that voice from the first one.
Right.
But I think for me, the trick is to say, no, that's a luxury in which we cannot indulge unless we have to, and then we can, So I think a lot of things, experimentation in general, I think it's best if it's earned. If you say, no, I'm going to write a very simple, one point of view, continuous time, realist story. That's what I'm doing. Okay, go ahead, try it. And then if the story or the material says, I need more than that, then you say, okay. And then it doesn't, theoretically, it's not felt as, an indulgence or a kind of a defiant act. It's felt as organic to what you're trying to accomplish. So I think when Hendrix, if you listen to his early stuff, it's not straight, but it's fairly straight R&B guitar. And then at some point you could see that his muse, or something in him was saying, yeah, this is not expressing what you want to express. I'm going to crank it up and I'm going to get all this distortion. And that becomes, it seems totally natural now, but at the time it was, I would guess, a response to a feeling of inadequacy in what he was doing. So, yeah.
Do you think of your stories? There's another question that was in there, but you just kind of brought it up. Do you think of your stories in a musical way at all? Or does musical way, like, does music play a role in your writing?
I think it does in a really deep, hardwired sense, because when I was, a kid in Chicago, I had been a reader and I quit. So all through high school, I wasn't much of a reader, but I listened to everything and I was, learning to play guitar. So I think I really studied albums at that time, the ordering of the songs, and also just the whole idea of, in a guitar solo, you're sitting there as a 17-year-old cynical, aspiring guitarist. It's time for the solo, and you're already a little bit like, another guitar solo. Then there's a moment where the person wins you over. So like, it's interesting, there's no words to the solo, there's no reason for it, but something in it persuaded you that it's necessary. That kind of thinking I do a lot in editing. Like, okay, yeah, I'm not really editing strictly for sense, but for kind of music, I guess. Yeah. So I think that's deeply hardwired. I don't think of it at all. I try not to think of it, but I think that's definitely true. Because a given paragraph, Van Halen, I think one time said, someone was asking about recording, what are you looking for? And he said, I don't know, man, it's just like the Brown sound, who knows? I don't know what that is, but he knew what it was. And so there's something like that in a paragraph. It's like you just want a certain Brown sound that makes the paragraph seem like yours, I guess, something like that. And it has not too much to do with sense, really. It has something to do with efficiency, and maybe making it go a little faster than you think it should. And then that's another way of saying to the reader, I know this is too fast, but you're smart and you'll follow, something like that. But it's all by feel.
Right. I mean, there's also it strikes me that so many of the things we talk about in this book sort of would also be applied to music. Like efficiency would be a great principle for music as well. Like, you don't want to have stuff that doesn't need to be in there. And, the idea that things have to be connected to one another.
Right. Right.
You can go from your verse to your chorus and you can do something really, really different, but there kind of has to be a reason, even if it's, totally aesthetic, that those two things go together.
100%. And, your reading mind or listening mind is so adept at making those connections below the level of language. So, and I think probably in our time, we're better listeners to music and better watchers of movies than we are readers. But you can see, you turn anything on Netflix or something, and you just watch your mind. And the first, 30 seconds to a minute, the director's view of you, they're honoring you or they're acting like you're stupid. And so I think that's an interesting, Aaron Copland had a really good book. I think it's called How to Listen to Music or something, but he talks about this, how, the standard classical form is a motif and a repetition and all different scales, but clearly, how close is the repetition? How many times you repeat? Those are actually the $1 million questions for composers. And I think they answer them intuitively. They know that, 6 repetitions, everybody's falling asleep, but 4.5 you can get away with or something.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting to think about those connections. Well, why don't we kind of settle on this? Somebody also asked about your story club on Substack, which, connects so much with what you are doing with this book. Looking to see exactly how they said that. Oh, they were kind of wondering where did Story Club come from? And
yeah.
It's kind of taken on a life of its own, but maybe you can tell us what it is and how it's gotten here.
Yeah, well, basically, Substack approached me. There's a really nice guy there named Dan Stone, who about 3 years ago, or maybe 2, said, would you like to do something? And at that time I was like, I don't have anything to say. I don't want to be, I have no desire to be an opinion person. And then the Russian book, I wrote it and it came out. And there was this wave of, I have a public email account at Syracuse, and I got so many emails from people. And it was different from the response you get to a fiction book, which is usually either I loved it or I hated it, why don't you get some therapy or whatever. But more like really participatory. People saying, I disagree with you about Alyosha the Pot, or here's what, you didn't mention this, or this got me through a really rough time. So there was something just really lovely about that, that I had brought people into this conversation. And so then I thought, I wonder if I could do that some more under the guise of a Substack newsletter. So I had this idea of story club, and now we're just kind of doing the same thing. I'll pick a story and I'll send it out, and we'll all read it. I'll usually have an essay or two about it, but the comments are unbelievable. It's such a lovely, friendly, cordial, smart group. So it's very much like teaching in class. You just put out a worthy question or two, and then you let this intelligent community respond. It's been really a real blessing that I was a little worried about it at first, and now it's just like a pure pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fun. I mean, you're saying, I agree. I think that we're better as a society at watching television. I mean, we recognize every move right before it.
Yeah.
But we are still because I think we know stories so well, even if it's in a different context, I'm always amazed at how people read. And in fact, I'll do an exercise with students sometimes where I'll just give them the very beginning of a story, just paragraphs, and ask them what they know about.
Yeah.
They're able to tell the whole story,
right,
from this opening, and that's part of the idea of the exercise, is to point out to them, look how good of a reader you are.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful. That's a great one. Yeah.
Little you need as a writer to actually tell your reader, because they're just intuiting worlds out of these little sentences that you're making.
That's beautiful. And I thought when I got done with the book, I thought one of the undercurrents of it is the idea that actually we're good readers of everything. We do it professionally. We have opinions about everything. And so in a certain way, it's noticing those micro opinions and then trusting them, and then knowing how to react, and so it does become sort of a life skill in a way. We're doing it all the time. And there is a kind of a moral, ethical dimension to it. Somebody's walking towards you on the sidewalk. You just made a judgment. Okay, that's human. Don't blame yourself. You made the judgment. Do you have the wherewithal to notice the judgment that you just made? Good. Can you notice that you might have made it without any basis? Interesting. So suddenly you're a more powerful person for having trained yourself to watch your own mind, to watch your own mental activities. It doesn't inhibit you in any way. It just makes you more, more cognizant of the machine you're in. So I think we can practice that on a short story, or a song, or a movie, and we find out, as you say, we're very good at it, really good at it. We're maybe not so good at knowing that we're good about it.
Mm-hmm.
But then it becomes kind of a beautiful life skill. And it's, I think for me, the nice thing is it makes moments more workable. If you're aware of what you're doing, you're judging and so on, it makes every moment kind of it makes it an adventure in reading. You're reading a room, you're reading a situation. And so it keeps kind of up,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that feels like a great place to sort of wrap up. I mean, I would keep you longer, but I'm not going to.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. It was really pleasure.
That idea of, reading and writing is an act of empathy, I think at its very core, and it's important. It's
the only thing, yeah.
You've just reiterated your desire to keep doing this and to keep telling these stories. But it's I think maybe we need to remind ourselves sometimes that this stuff is important, that we are learning as not just writers, but as readers. We're learning about our world, we're learning about ourselves, and hopefully becoming a little bit better people in the process.
Beautifully said. Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I do also feel bad because we had so many great questions and we only scratched the surface, but we just can't go through them all.
You can't. Just come to Story Club, and in a couple of weeks, I'm going to take questions from all comers and answer them. So just check in there, and we'll be in touch.
Okay. Are you going to wrap us up, Amanda?
I am. Thank you so much, Kevin. That was a beautifully facilitated conversation. And thank you so much, George, for joining us this evening. I was taking copious notes as I do and clutching my book, feeling like I was at church. So thank you for that. And thank you to all of you who joined us this evening. Some people might be celebrating Cinco de Mayo. Here in Northern Michigan, the sun is actually out. And we're so grateful that you all are joining us this evening, and those of you that are watching the recording as well. So thank you. I want to take a moment to encourage you all, if you haven't already picked up the book, to please do so. Pick up A Swim in the Pond the Rain from your favorite independent bookstore. And I want to thank our literary sponsor again for this evening tonight, Mission Point Press. And thank you to our donors and major supporters, Cordia, Today's Golden Fowler Home Furnishings, the Northwest Michigan Arts and Culture Network, Interlochen Public Radio, and the Traverse City Record Eagle. This event is also made possible in part by the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, the Michigan Humanities Council, and the National Endowment for the Arts. And thanks again to all of you, our viewers. Your support makes all the difference, and the proceeds of our events go to our Raising Writers programs to help share this love of reading and writing with youth. And in fact, we have some incredible programs coming up for our local youth, including a masterclass with Paige St. John of the LA Times on Monday, May 9th. So please visit our website for all the details. Thank you again, everyone, for being here, and have a great night.